have these two small rocks from both times I've summited Mount Everest. We can unlock that potential. We can unlock that reservoir of vast potential inside of all of us. And really the choice is up to us and how we switch our mindset.
Today's interview is with Colin O'Brady, the author of Impossible First. He solo traveled across Antarctica with no support. And today we're going to find out what it took. Guys, if you want to see more from Colin O'Brady, please head down below and there's a link in the description for all his websites and his book, Impossible First. And also, before we get started, please go follow myself on Instagram at Jordan MulliganBrother, where you can see more behind the scenes of the channel. So just for people who don't know, just introduce yourself and what you do.
My name's Colin O'Brady. I'm a 10-time world record holding explorer. I've done things like walked across Antarctica solo and fully human powered. I was the first person to do that in the world. Climbed Mount Everest twice, rode a boat across Drake Passage, a New York Times bestselling book called The Impossible First. And I'm also an entrepreneur. I've sold some businesses and things like that. So I got my hand in a few things, but most people know me for being the guy who walked across Antarctica solo, unsupported, and fully human powered.
Yeah, a lot of stuff. So like going through everything was a challenge in itself. To say you've done those tasks, like and what goes into them, unimaginable. But we'll stick here for now. Whereabouts did you grow up?
So I'm from the U.S. I was actually born in a place called Olympia, Washington, in the Pacific Northwest, kind of near Seattle. And I was born in a hippie commune, actually. So I have an untraditional birth. I was born at home. My mom had 30 people over to hang out and, some pot smoking hippies basically hanging out while a baby was being born. My mom played Bob Marley Redemption song on repeat throughout my entire birth. But shortly thereafter, I moved to Portland, Oregon, just a few hours south of where I was born, and mostly grew up in Portland, Oregon, which is the Pacific Northwest, the United States. Smaller city, but surrounded by beautiful wilderness and things like that.
Okay, so for a British audience, how would you paint an image of your childhood growing up around Portland?
I grew up in a city, but a smaller city, not like a London or something like that, like kind of like a secondary smaller city, like maybe like a Newcastle or a Liverpool, or some like a smaller kind of middle-sized city. It was a good way to grow up. I didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid, but I was surrounded by love, I suppose. And what's beautiful about Portland actually is, like I said, we didn't have a lot of money to travel and things like that, but you can drive basically kind of 30 minutes in any direction. You're in beautiful wilderness. So one way you drive and you're in the big snow-capped mountain called Mount Hood. People say it looks like Mount Fuji in Japan. It's a big volcano where you can ski and hike in the summer and stuff. And then if you drive the other direction about an hour, you're at the ocean. You're at the coast, the Pacific Ocean. It's a cool little city kind of nestled within a lot of wilderness, and it attracts a lot of people that love to be outside, move their bodies. Unfortunately for me as a kid who didn't have a lot of money growing up, those things are mostly free. Let's drive out to this trailhead and go for a hike. Let's go camping. My parents were really into the outdoors, which certainly I'd say laid the foundation for deeper exploration in the world as I've done in my adult life.
Okay, so it's really interesting. You was involved in some of that stuff already, but as a child, looking at the stuff you've achieved now and the stuff that you're doing now, was you born with this mindset, this mentality that you have at the moment?
I certainly give a lot of credit to that, to my parents, my mother for sure. People always are saying, "Oh my gosh, your son walked across Antarctica. You must have been so afraid." Or, he climbed Everest these 2 times, or he's in a little rowboat in the middle of a huge raging ocean, or, these things like, you must be so afraid. And she always says to me, she goes, as a mother, careful what you wish for when you tell your kid every day they can do anything they set their mind to. And so I think that like I said, I grew up in a humble background, but there was still this belief of a growth mindset, of a belief that you can kind of do anything you set your mind to. And that was something from a very small kid, that my mother instilled in me. And I think that, I fully have embodied that throughout my life, for sure. And I think that made a huge difference.
Was there a turning point that sort of cranked it up, that made it that feeling more intense?
I think the biggest thing for me, was when I was traveling in Thailand not long after graduating from college. Didn't have, had never really traveled much, saved up some money from painting houses as a teenager and said, when I graduate from university, I want to see the world. And so, as many Brits do, I know it's not as common for Americans, but, I took a backpack and for me, a surfboard and said, hey, I'm going to go see the world a little bit. Amazing experience for me up until I found myself on this small beach in rural Thailand. And I saw a couple guys jumping a flaming jump rope down the beach. And I'm 22 years old at the time, maybe not a fully formed prefrontal cortex, or didn't have the realizing how risky that was. But I did that, and in an instant, my life changed. So the rope, it wrapped around my legs and lit my body completely on fire, to my neck. Survival mode kicked in when I needed it most, and I jumped into the ocean, which extinguished the flames, but not before about 25% of my body was severely burned, predominantly my legs and my feet. And I was taken in a moped, not an ambulance, but a little moped down a dirt path, like this one-room shack. I was on this island in the middle of nowhere in town. There was not proper medical facilities, but they couldn't move me, and so I underwent 8 surgeries on these small island hospitals. There was a cat running around my bed and across my chest in the ICU. I mean, just basically a nightmare scenario. But the physical pain was one thing, but the emotional pain, I'll never forget this moment. This doctor walks in and he looks me straight in the eyes, and through his broken Thai English, he basically looks at me and goes, Colin, you'll never walk again normally. Just boom. And so the emotional sort of downward spiral was immense. I've been an athlete, an active kid, and just all of a sudden, from a stupid mistake, my life as I knew it was taken away from me. But we were speaking about my mother before, and she's really the hero of this story, which is she flew over to Thailand, took her 4 or 5 days to find me and track me down. And I said, look, they say I'm never going to walk again normally. And she goes, forget about that for a second. Close your eyes. And she says, visualize you living your best life. Visualize yourself on the other side of this adversity. Like, what are you doing? Let's really visualize this. And this is still the same mother that told me you can do anything you set your mind to as I was the little kid. And I closed my eyes and I start kind of smiling. She's like, what is it? And I say, I see myself crossing the finish line of a triathlon, which is not something. I was a swimmer, but I've never, raced a triathlon before. But that's kind of what came to me in this moment. And what happened next, I think, is probably one of the most important moments in my life. My mother could have said, I said visualize something, but like the doctor said, you're not going to walk again. I'm bandaged from the waist down. I haven't taken a step in a month. And she could have said, you know what, like maybe something more realistic. But she didn't do that. Instead, she was just like, okay, like, great. I believe you. I don't know how we're going to get there, but you're going to do that. And let's start training the mind and your body to get there. And so it was several months where I didn't take a single step. I was actually flown back to Portland, Oregon, where I'm from, but I was carried on and off the planes after 2 months of being in Thailand. I was in a wheelchair when I got home. But my mom didn't let up on that goal. She says to me that first morning, I'm sitting in a wheelchair in her kitchen, and she goes, today, your goal is to take your very first step. She took a wooden chair from the table in front of our kitchen and placed it in front of my wheelchair. She goes, you got to figure out somehow how to take your first step today into that chair in front of me. Now I'm looking down at my legs. They're still bandaged. They're still bleeding. They're still fragile. I haven't taken a single step at all. But it takes me 3 hours kind of grabbing the edges of the wheelchair to get the courage to take that step on these still burnt feet. But I take one step and sit in the chair down next in front of me. But the next day, my mom moves the chair 5 steps away, the next 10 steps away. Each day I can take a few more steps. And then eventually, fast forward 18 months after I've been burned, I'd moved to Chicago to take a job to kind of get on with my life after this terrible tragedy. And I did sign up for the Chicago Triathlon to kind of honor this goal. And through that year and a half, I had learned how to walk again and slowly run and jog. And so I sign up for the Chicago Triathlon. I jump into the lake. I swim a mile in the lake. I get on my bike. I ride 25 miles as fast as I can. I put on my running shoes, and I run 6.2 miles, 10K, crossing the finish line. And I was so excited that I had, gone from this wheelchair, being told I would never walk again, to finishing this race. But what was completely surprising to me is that I hadn't just finished the race, but I actually won the entire Chicago Triathlon, placing first out of nearly 5,000 other participants on the day. Forgive it's somewhat of a long answer, but in conclusion, my mind didn't go in that moment like, oh, I must be an amazing athlete. My first triathlon, I beat 5,000 other people. That's not, my mind didn't go there at all. My mind went back to that Thai hospital room and wondered, what would have happened had my mom not forced me to look towards the future and set this measurable goal. And in that moment, I realized that all of us, not just me, you, every single person on this planet, we have reservoirs of untapped potential inside of us to achieve extraordinary things, particularly when we can shift our mindsets towards the positive in these dark moments. Life is hard. Hopefully you don't get burned in a fire, but you will face adversity. You will face setbacks. I don't care how rich or poor or young or old, whatever you are, like that's part of life. But what I realize is we have an opportunity to decide how we react in those moments. And the mother that told me throughout my whole life, you can do anything you set your mind to, she stuck to that positivity and those ethos, even in the scariest, darkest moments of both of our lives in rural Thailand, wrapped in bandages and gauze. She still was like, this isn't the forever situation. What do you want to visualize? What do you want to be? And so I love to tell people that's just my experience, but I think it in some regard applies to every single person, which is, again, we can unlock that potential. We can unlock that reservoir of vast potential inside of all of us. And really the choice is up to us and how we switch our mindset. And so my mother, although she was incepting me bit by bit as a child, really in this deep, dark moment taught me one of life's greatest lessons in the face of extreme adversity.
I mean, it's so powerful because when you're taking it from being in Thailand to finishing a triathlon, there is so much in between that's happening. How do people apply that groundbreaking lesson to their own lives? Like, how would somebody take that and apply that to a similar goal that they have, or whatever goal it is?
I think that there's a feeling in our lives when we are at a certain moment, especially when it's bad, we have this feeling like it's always going to be that way. Like that's just the human condition. Like, oh my God, I made a bad investment and I lost all of my money. I'm going to be broke forever. Right. Or I'm burning a fire. I'm bandaged from the waist down. I'm never going to walk again normally. This is how it's always going to be. But I choose to look at it a little bit differently. And I certainly learned this over time. I'm big into meditation, and, there's a Buddhist, very old Buddhist mantra, which is, commonly used, which is this too shall pass, or this too shall change, meaning like we're never in a permanent state. And once you can realize that, you can open up the vastness of possibility. Just like, yeah, in this moment, like this sucks. Or like I said, I lost all my money, or the person I love broke up with me and my heart is broken, or whatever that is. But also leaning into like, this is not a permanent state. So I can build back, I can grow, I can evolve, I can learn from this moment. And I mean, it's somewhat cliche, but sometimes it's worthwhile to say cliche. Like my mom, she put that chair in front of me, that wooden chair. It's like, okay, you want to race a triathlon? That might take you 18 months or 2 years to get there. But the first thing is to take your first step, to actually change your circumstance in the smallest, most incremental way. And I think we're all capable of doing that. Particularly, you mentioned goals. I find for myself that having that big goal out there, being like, okay, I can't walk, I want to race a triathlon, that's important because that's your guiding North Star. But you zoom back from that for a second and you go, that seems so far. How do I even bridge the distance between, like you said, there's so much that happened between there. And so it's about the incremental goals are actually the most valuable. It's the next step to the chair, and then the 10 steps the following day, and then the finally getting out of my parents' basement and moving to Chicago. It's that how can you make yourself feel fulfilled and incrementally improving your situation? Because those 1% gains is ultimately what adds up to the vastness. I talk about this in the context, I've climbed Mount Everest twice, and standing at the bottom of Mount Everest, and you look up at the tallest mountain in the world, and you think to yourself, like, man, like that's so far. How am I ever going to get there? I don't have them with me right now, but they're in the other room. I have these two small rocks from both times I've summited Mount Everest. I've taken them from the summit, and I carry them. I keep them close to me for the reason is that it's a reminder that even Mount Everest, the largest mountain in the world, can be broken down to its smallest incremental parts. Mount Everest is actually just a bunch of small rocks stacked on top of each other, many steps leading to the summit. And I think we can apply that in our own lives. These big goals, they seem so big. They seem Mount Everest size. How could I ever get from the first day I opened my business to having, $100 million business? Well, here's what it is. You stack the small rocks day by day by day by day. And before you know it, you have a Mount Everest size, you've achieved the summit of a Mount Everest size goal.
Yeah, I mean, so many people create these grand goals, and I think they scare themselves. They genuinely scare themselves, and I think, and then there's the other type of person who will just put their head down and look up, and they're halfway there, or almost just from taking a step at a time. How did you decide to go from doing the triathlon and go, yeah, that was fun, I'm going to do something bigger and grander? Like, why did you keep doing that, and how did you get to that point?
Yeah, so after that triathlon, like I said, I had taken a job in finance. I have an economics degree from Yale. Thought I would, work in that some space of that, I guess. But I won this triathlon, and it's like I'm like a year into my first ever kind of real job as a 23-year-old guy. And this may have seemed like a bad career decision, so to speak, but I won this triathlon. A guy who I know said, hey, I'll give you a little bit of funding to help sponsor you if you want to train triathlon more full time. You clearly have, a knack for this. So I didn't hesitate at all. I just walked in and quit my day job on that Monday. And most people are like, what do you mean? You have this great job and you're going to be a professional triathlete? Like, that's not like being, a footballer or, in the NBA or something like that. That's like being super poor and sleeping on your friends' couches and riding your bike around. Even, the Brownlees, who are famous over in the UK, they've done well for themselves, but there's a very rare few that like make that level. And even them, they're not like footballers or anything like that. Right. And so, but I wanted to cultivate that passion inside of myself. So I ended up racing triathlon professionally all over the world, 25 countries, 6 different continents, and over about a 6-year period of time. And then I kind of asked myself, what does the little boy inside of me still want? What's the, what were my childhood dreams? Now that I am, at this point, in my late 20s at that point. And I said, I always wanted to climb Mount Everest. That was just something I just, as a little kid, I was obsessed with. I was curious about, never knew it was possible. And now I felt like I was equipped with the mentality, the mindset, the support. It's going to take me a lot of challenge to raise the money, et cetera. But I was much closer to believing that was possible. And so I stopped racing triathlon and I set myself this goal of doing something called the Explorers Grand Slam. So that's to climb the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents, which are the 7 summits, as well as complete expeditions to both the North Pole and South Pole. And fewer than 50 people in history had ever done that. And I was saying, I want to be the fastest. I want to set the world record for the cumulative time. So not taking any rest between the mountains, but actually going, from Kilimanjaro to Denali to Everest to North Pole to South Pole without taking any breaks, in between, basically. And I set my sights on that. Now, it's important to note, because this is true of, that was my first big world record project. And as I said, I have 10 world records now. So I've continued this process over time. I knew a little bit about climbing mountains. I grew up climbing some mountains and stuff like that, but certainly not at the level of the technical proficiency. I knew nothing about polar exploration to the poles. But again, the fixed mindset would say, well, I don't know these things, I'm never going to know it. But the growth mindset says, you know what? I want to do these things. I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there, but like, I can learn that. I can evolve. I can pull in experts. I can pull in coaches. I can learn. I can be curious. I can Google stuff. I can YouTube stuff, whatever that is. And I think that's so important, because we get caught up. We set this big goal, but then we go, no, that's for other people. You would have had to been doing that for your whole life, or I'm not the kind of person who knows how to do this. But instead I set that big goal, and I was like, I looked at my wife, massive supporter of mine. We've built everything and created together. My wife, Jenna, she's incredible. And we're both like, cool. So we have no idea how we're going to do this, but like, awesome. That's exciting. Like, we're excited by the process of learning that. So anyways, triathlon led to this Explorers Grand Slam. I ended up doing all of those mountains, the 7 summits in the North and South Pole, in 139 days consecutively, and setting 2 world records for the Explorers Grand Slam and the 7 summits. And a question that I started asking during that time, I have this nonprofit where I focus on inspiring young kids around the same concepts we're talking about, aspirational goal setting. And so when I was actually climbing Mount Everest, we were doing some social media campaigns. We were talking to school kids all over the world. And Jenna started saying over my social media, hey, Colin is climbing Mount Everest right now as a part of this bigger world record project. But she started asking like, hey, what's your Everest? A metaphor to kids. They can understand, like, what is your big, seemingly out of reach goal? What is your Everest? it's fun to ask young kids this question. I've done this for years now. In a gymnasium of elementary school kids, you ask that question and 500 hands shoot up in the air because they're still they're still creative and willing to share that because life hasn't knocked them down. Now, I do a lot of public speaking at corporations and things like that. You ask a room of 500 adults, what's your childhood dream, or what's your Everest, or what's your big goal? And like, you're lucky to get like one hand in the back of the room shoot up, because of adults, we have a little bit of limiting beliefs. We've been knocked down by life enough to be like, oh, I thought I could do this, but honestly, I'm just going to like be complacent about my place in life. So as fun as it is to ask kids this question, I realize it's actually a more important and valuable question to ask adults. More so, I realized I needed to ask myself this question, right? Like, I had just climbed Mount Everest, but I'm 30 years old. I have 2 world records, but what am I going to do? Just kick my feet up and do nothing for the rest of my life? I actually asked myself, what is my next Everest? What is my next massive goal to continue this? And that's when I set my sights on not just a world record, but a world first, actually doing something that nobody in history had ever done, which was complete the world's first solo, unsupported, which means no resupplies of food or fuel, and a fully human-powered crossing of Antarctica from one coast to the South Pole to the other coast, something that a lot of British explorers actually over time had tried. No one had succeeded yet. So that was my next Everest. Many people said it was impossible. My book is actually called The Impossible First, as is the project, because I said, hey, people say it's impossible. This might be impossible, actually, but I'm still willing to try. Like, I'm still willing to aim that high, because if I succeed, great. But if I fail, at least I've failed trying to do something as hard as I possibly can and pouring my heart and soul into it.
Let's go on to the Antarctica story then, because the day one baffles me. I think it's a fantastic lesson to be learned. What's day one like, and the whole journey process, I guess?
It's a year in the planning, of this. I've had spent a little bit of time in Antarctica previous to this, but I'm not like super experienced polar explorer. So again, going through the process of learning and training, and I did this whole thing where I worked with a company called Standard Process and create all this custom food to optimize my food and nutrition. And one of the biggest things is it's unsupported, which means no resupplies of food or fuel, which means you have to pack everything in your sled that you're going to take with you the entirety of the time. And I thought I'd had thought this through and planned it as best I could. And so my sled started out weighing 375 pounds, which is 160 kilograms. And as I'm getting ready to depart for Antarctica, I come to find out that there's actually another explorer, a British guy who is a special forces SAS guy, Captain Lou Rudd, attempting the crossing at the same time. Now, when I say the same time, I mean actually the same time, meaning like there's one season, there's one person that owns the planes in Antarctica, and we've both called the same guy and said, hey, can you drop me off on the edge of the continent on this one day? So before I know it, not only I was trying to raise history, trying to do something no one had ever done before, and a couple years previous, a British explorer attempting a very similar crossing unfortunately died 71 days into this expedition, Henry Worsley. So we knew the stakes were real, and Lou's a good friend of Henry. But I'm now shoulder to shoulder, and forgive the Brits on this call. Lou and I are now friends, but in this moment, it was super intimidating, like shoulder to shoulder in this cargo plane. I'm looking over at this guy. He's really experienced. He spent, hundreds of days in Antarctica previously, and he's looking at me like, dude, like, you have no chance here. Like, why are you even going to try? Like, you're pretty inexperienced, you're young, like all this kind of stuff. And I was super intimidated in this moment. And I think he's kind of playing on my mind a little bit, got chipping away at my confidence. So anyways, we fly out there, we get dropped off. It's nearly 1,000-mile journey. It's 930 some miles, nearly 1,000-mile journey to do this crossing. And we agree that standing right next to each other to start this race might be a little bit too much. And so we sailed the pilot, drop us off 1 mile from each other, but equidistant to the first waypoint of our GPS. And so, but we can still see each other. The plane doesn't even take off again, just drops me off and then drives for 2 minutes, and then he pops out of the plane. We can look at each other and we kind of wave, and we're like, okay, 1,000-mile race across Antarctica, like ready, go. It's going to take at least a couple of months to complete this thing if we're fortunate enough to complete it. And I'm like, okay, like I'm feeling good. I actually pull out my phone and I try to like say some like profound thing into my camera, like, this is the first steps of this journey. I mean, it's silly, right? We're just like, marking the beginning. Then I strap on my sled. So I've got this kind of harness that's like a backpack and then a rope connected to the sled. Now it's 160 kilograms, 375 pounds. And all of a sudden I just start like, hey, here I go, 1,000 miles. And I start pulling it and I'm just like, and I look behind me and I'm like, oh, it must be deep snow. I'm all right. I trained for this. Like, I'm ready. And get back home. I've told thoughts. I've been on, the New York Times and the Today Show and big media outlets kind of announcing this project. So I've told millions of people, hey, I'm going to try to do this thing. And all of a sudden I realized I can't pull my sled. Like, I just straight up like cannot move this sled more than like 100 feet, let alone 1,000 miles. So I start crying. I literally start sobbing and crying. It's embarrassing, but I'm crying. But what happens when you're crying in Antarctica? Well, it's minus 25 degrees outside. So the tears, they actually freeze to your face. Now I have frozen tears on my face. I've moved my sled 100 feet and I think it can't get any worse. But I finally look over to my right to look at Luke because I think like misery loves company. He must be struggling too. I look over and he's just in like a full march, like having no problems and just quickly disappears over the horizon. So I can't move my sled. The guy I'm racing is already kicking my butt and we're only, an hour into this, 2-month race. And I'm just completely defeated. So I pick up my satellite phone and like I said, we had named the project The Impossible First because it was a world first and might be impossible. So I pick up my satellite phone. I call my wife, Jenna, who's running logistics back home and monitoring everything. And she's like, why are you calling me? Didn't you just get dropped off? Like, what's up? And I looked at her and I say to her on the phone, I say, I think we named our project the right thing. It appears that it is indeed impossible. And she's like, what? And I was like, I just can't pull my sled. And she said something in that moment that really changed a lot of things. It was a really important, influential thing. She goes, Colin, how far are you away from your first waypoint? I looked down at my GPS. I've got these GPS coordinates in there. And I said, I'm 0.54 miles. I'm a half a mile away from the first waypoint of this whole journey. But I'm saying it like it's a million, half a mile, like, like it's impossible to get there. She goes, do me a favor. Forget about Lou, forget about the race. Forget about the nearly 1,000 miles of frozen tundra that you need to cross. Just get to that first waypoint. You'll feel like you made some progress today. When you get there, set up your tent and you can kind of reassess and gather yourself, in the morning. And so sure enough, I struggle. It takes me several hours, but I get to that first waypoint and I set up my tent. And so at least she kind of, walks me through this process of getting somewhere, right? It's almost like the chair, just like take that first step, do something. We'll figure out tomorrow, just focus on this. The following morning, my alarm goes off. And as it goes off, I wake up. I remember how desperate and horrible of a situation I am. I remember the frozen tears and how embarrassed I am. And I think we can all relate to that. I was alone, but I was in that tent with the worst demon that any of us face, which is my own mind. Colin, you suck. Colin, you're not strong. Colin, you told all these people that you're going to do this. How embarrassing. You're never going to make it. You might as well quit now. All that negative talk, right, is just in my mind. And I'm a big believer that we are the stories that we tell ourselves. Just like when something bad happens to us, and we talked earlier about how you can reframe that and actually choose how you move forward. You're never going to walk again normally. No, let's visualize a positive outcome. It's the same with our negative self-talk. And no matter how strong you are, you're always going to have these moments of doubt, right? And so I'm big on mantras. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to override this negative voice by yelling out loud at the top of my lungs. And so I'm completely by myself in Antarctica. But again, I believe we're the stories we tell ourselves. So I yell at the top of my lungs, Colin, you are strong. You are capable. You are strong. You are capable. I keep yelling it until I can't hear that negative voice anymore. And it gives me enough energy to pack my sled up and start pulling it again. And look, it's not like all of a sudden I went from pulling it, barely 100 feet to all of a sudden, no, and I'm going miles and miles per day. It was still super slow going. It was still super challenging. Every day I ate some food, so my sled got, a kilogram lighter, which isn't much, but over time that adds up a little bit lighter. But every day I woke up saying, you are strong, you are capable, you are strong, you are capable, and keeping that positive self-talk going versus letting the negativity of my own voice override that. And certainly that, coupled with Jenna reminding me, just make it to the next waypoint, just make it to the next waypoint, forget about the 1,000 miles, just chip away at this thing, certainly made all the difference in my ultimate success out there. And I did pass Captain Lou on the 6th day, and fortunately stayed ahead of him. But he did complete the crossing a couple of days after me, and I was very proud of him. We remain friends to this day, but it was a heated battle, and I was certainly proud of winning the race and becoming the first person to complete this crossing. But it started in the worst way possible, and I almost gave up right in that first moment, for sure.
I think it's amazing that you went back to the thing that your mum taught you back in that hospital in Thailand. It's like, it is such an important lesson. Just the tiniest step, just literally that one step. But the positive self-talk, how can somebody implement that into a day-to-day life?
So I think there's a couple of things. One is, it starts with awareness, right? It starts with actually finding a way to sort of listen to your inner voice. For me, that's been through a meditation practice, but that can be through any sort of thing: mindfulness, yoga, meditation, anything where you're kind of just observing your mind. And look, that could be 5 minutes a day. You don't have to become like a monk or something like this, right? Once you can tap into that awareness of self, it's amazing how much less reactive you have to be in certain moments. Like, you can kind of detach yourself and look at yourself almost as a third party, looking in on your own thoughts and going, oh, that's my negative voice. That's my voice that's afraid or full of doubt coming to hang out with me. And I kind of sometimes say, in my darkest moments, or in Antarctica or wherever, it's like I'm throwing a party and both my angels and my demons are all invited. They're both, sitting on my shoulders, chirping at me, talking to me. But again, I'll repeat it because I said it before, but this is the core belief of mine: is we are the stories that we tell ourselves. If you wake up every single morning and you just tell yourself, like, I suck, I'm never going to reach that goal, no one's going to love me, my business is going to fail, like whatever that is, like that's the most likely outcome, because you're going to be that I'm the guy who always has bad luck, I'm the person who never succeeds. Like you are actually manifesting or creating that. But guess what? It's not anybody else telling you that. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. You're talking to your own self. Your own consciousness is hearing this. And so you actually have the choice to tune into, once you have this awareness, being like, wait a second, why am I beating up my own self? Like, I'm literally doing this to my own self right now. But I have the power to rewrite the story I tell myself. You don't have control over external things, other people's perceptions, other people's projections. Bad luck if you're driving down the road at perfect speed limit and somebody just comes out of nowhere and hits your car. Like, you didn't have any control of that. That's bad luck. And you know what? Sometimes you have bad luck. But what you do have complete control over is A, how you react to that, and B, how you speak to yourself. Life is hard enough already. Like, life is just hard. Other people are going to challenge you and beat up on you, whatever. You don't have to pile onto that with your own voice. So rewrite the story you tell yourself. You might not be in great shape, but you put your running shoes on and you run one block around your block. You might not be an Olympic level runner, but you can say to yourself, I'm a runner. I'm a runner. And the next day you run two blocks. Next day you run 3. The next day you run, 3 miles, whatever that is. It's like you have the ability to actually say, I'm not this right now, but I can become this. And so it's about rewriting those stories and actually embedding that in your identity. I am a runner. I am the person that's going to succeed. I am strong. I am capable. Whatever that looks like in that moment, you get to talk to yourself. And I think that that's very powerful.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think the sad thing is I'll see people who go through a tough life, and there are the people who take the positive route, but then there's some people who get stuck in that negative loop, and they start to go down there and start to tell themselves that maybe they're not worthy, maybe they deserve this life. What's the break? How do you break that? Like, what is there tools that we can use? Is there something do you have to reach a break point in life to start to see the positive?
Obviously, this burn accident that I shared before, was a very transformative moment for my own self. And although it was one of the worst days of my life, in a lot of ways, I think of it as one of the best days of my life in retrospect, because I learned so much from it. Now, my advice isn't go light yourself on fire because you'll learn a great lesson from it, but it is to say there are opportunities for growth. Sometimes the best opportunities for growth are in the midst of challenge or chaos, right? But in terms of how do we break that cycle? Look, I think that looks differently for every single person. But one thing I've come to realize is, I love this phrase, which is, pain is mandatory, but suffering is optional. So what that means to me is like, yeah, life is going to be hard, but you get to choose how much you want to suffer in that or how much you want to grow. And so through my expeditions, but I think it applies fully to life, which is the hardest things we face. Like usually you're not going to face the highest high of your life without actually embracing the lows, right? There's no light without the darkness. And so I think that there's a little bit of a reframing in the mind, which is as we're facing a hard time, I like to reframe it for myself and say, great, I love this. I love this hard time because I know this is teaching me something. This is where I'm growing. And so the more and more, you're looking for a specific tool, the more and more I think that we can have an awareness of each moment is temporary. This too shall pass, but also embracing both the highs and the lows of life. The pendulum swing of both those things is actually, that is the fabric of life, and our choice is how to react in each and any one of those different situations.
Yeah, I mean, I hear this quite a lot, is awareness. Like a lot of it is coming down to awareness and having that self-awareness. We actually just started working with this monk who's really talking about meditation, and I wonder how you use meditation yourself to get the positive self-talk. And is that a tool you would use to get those things into your daily routine or into your mind?
Yeah, totally. So 10 years ago was when I was racing triathlon professionally. I realized that, I'm racing this race, and a friend of mine, this Turkish woman, she comes to one of my races, and she pulls me aside after the race. Obviously we're swimming, we're biking, we're running professional level. We're like, so hard and challenging. We're sweating, working really hard. And I get to the finish line and she goes to me, she goes, I don't know much about sports. It's not really my thing. But clearly this is a very big mental challenge as much as it is a physical. And so she just looks at me really kindly and says, so what are you doing to train your mind? And I kind of looked at her and I was embarrassed, actually, like I'd been caught with my pants down. I was like, well, I work out every day and I this and I that. And she was like, oh, no, but like, consciously. And I realized I wasn't doing anything. And so she suggested that I go to this meditation retreat. She goes, oh, you should try meditation. I go, well, tell me, what your experience with that. I'm open to it. I just don't know that much about how to start or whatever. And she says, this might sound like a lot, but there's these 10-day meditation retreats. There's silence, no reading, no writing, no eye contact, 12 hours a day of meditation. And now you might know from my story about the guy who just jumps into walking across Antarctica without having the skills, or tries to row a boat across Drake Passage without knowing much about rowing. Basically, I was like, great, sign me up. And so I signed up for this 10-day meditation retreat, having never meditated a minute in my life. It was extremely challenging. It was extremely hard, but ultimately it taught me really how to meditate and be self-aware. I've done that 10 days several times, and was part of that training is what allowed me to actually be able to go to Antarctica and be alone for 2 months, right? Now, what I've come to realize, and what I love to say to people, is the most important muscle that any of us has is the 6 inches between our ears. Now, I say that intentionally. I say the word muscle there intentionally, because if I said to you, hey, man, like, I want to get jacked, I want to get like strong, you'd be like, cool, man. So like, how much are you bench pressing every day at the gym? Like, that's how you're going to get big and buff, upper body. And we understand that as a culture, we just like, that's just obvious to us. If you want to get jacked muscles, you work out. Unfortunately, what we miss, and it's so obvious once you realize it, is the mind is a muscle. The mind is a muscle. Like if you want to have a stronger mind, or you want to have more awareness, just like you have to walk yourself to the gym to lift the weights, you actually need to take your mind to the mental gym. You need to work it out, flex and develop that every single day. So for me, look, if anyone's interested in the 10-day silent meditation retreats, they're completely free to go to. They're all over the world. It'll change your life. And it's the best 10-day return on investment I've ever seen, period. There are a lot of people that say, oh, 10 days, I don't have 10 days or whatever. Fine. I think you do have 10 days, but if you don't have 10 days, that's fine, which is, it's finding the daily practice, because it's not just the immersive thing that helped me be the inroad to that, but that has turned into a short daily, 10-minute, 20-minute, daily meditation and awareness practice. And that's me every single day, taking my mind to the gym. And any person that doesn't tell me I don't have 10 minutes to dedicate to my, mental well-being, I don't have 20 minutes. I'm like, yo, but have you seen all the seasons of Game of Thrones on Netflix? And they're like, oh yeah, the 8th season, 9th episode was amazing. I'm like, well, then you do have the 20 minutes every single day, or how much time we all scroll on our Instagram. Look, I'm just like that too. I'm human. I waste my time in a number of different ways. Point being is, find a way, and there's lots of different ways. Like I said, yoga, meditation, awareness, mindfulness practices. There's a million books on this. There's a million seminars. There's a million online courses. There's the Headspace app. Like, it doesn't really matter which of any of those things that you do, but it's find a way to take the most important muscle that we all have, the 6 inches between our ears, to the mental gym every single day. Through that consistency of that, you start to build awareness within yourself. And when you have that self-awareness, look, I'm not Buddha, I'm not a monk or whatever, but there's such a big difference between having that awareness and how that can apply to every single thing in your life, how that starts to apply to your interpersonal relationships, your wife or your spouse, your children, your coworkers, your colleagues, the way you treat your business, more importantly, the way you treat yourself, that positive self-talk. So you have to train yourself a little bit to tune into it. But once you do, it has exponential benefits across all sort of spaces of your life.
I completely agree. I'll be honest, it's only been I think a couple of weeks now of it, but it's something I always used to practice, but never consistently. And since doing it consistently, it's been such a game changer. I want to take it to the positive mindset of a growth mindset, and just explaining what that is to people, because I know people who have growth mindsets and they're so interesting to watch, to see how they'll work through a project or a process, or how they're trying to achieve a job or their goal. But I don't know if everyone understands what it means even.
Yeah. So to me, this is one of the most fundamental things to unlocking your best life, reaching your goals, achievement, fulfillment, etc., is the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So a fixed mindset says, I am this way in this moment, and I will always be this way forever. So to ground that in something tangible, it's like, I'm really great at math, but I'm not very creative. I'm a lazy person. I'm not an athlete, or I'm not a morning person. I'm always tired in the morning. The fixed mindset says, this is just the way I am always. The growth mindset, which is the powerful tool for all of this, and we all have the ability to have a growth mindset. It's just a shift and being like, oh, okay. It says, I am this, fill in the blanks. I am good at math right now and currently not that creative. But it says, it doesn't mean that I can't learn to be more creative. Or in the sense of the person that says, I'm a non-athlete, or I've never gone on a run in my life. It's the person who looks out their window and sees somebody running by and goes, I've never done that before. Maybe I should try that. I'm sure I could get more fit if I went running on a regular basis. And that growth mindset is really what sets people apart from being fixed, stuck in their ways, disappointed with life, just kind of plateauing, versus the people that just are continually growing, are lifelong learners. I'll give you an example in my own life from one of my other expeditions, which is after I crossed Antarctica solo, I, of course, there's always the what's next question, right? And I'm not always necessarily trying to do the biggest, baddest, more hard thing, but I'm curious about the world and different things that I can learn and explore. And so I'd always been interested in ocean rowing. I never spent a lot of time in the ocean though. And I decided with a few other people that we're going to attempt to be the first people in history to row across Drake Passage. So Drake Passage is from the southern tip of South America to Antarctica, 750 miles. It's known as the most dangerous stretch of ocean in the world because the Atlantic, Pacific, and Southern Ocean all collide. There's icebergs, the water's freezing cold, and on a regular day, 40-foot swells. I mean, it's just intense. And we're like, hey, let's go out there in a 28-foot rowboat. completely human powered, tiny. Now, I said, I light up and I'm like, great, this is an awesome idea. And, we got to figure out how to fund the project and get publicity around it. And I go to Discovery Channel and I pitch them, a very high budget documentary that they can film and show across the world on Discovery Channel. And they buy into it. They green light it. They say, yes, this is an awesome project. We're going to do this. And you can actually on Discovery Plus now, if you want to see this documentary, it's up there. It's called The Impossible Row on the Discovery Plus, their new streaming platform. But anyways, so the deal's done. I've committed to it. We're leaving in 3 months. And then I look over to my wife and I go, and she knows this. I go, I've never rowed a boat anywhere. Like, I'm not a rower, like literally not at summer camp, not like, certainly not in an ocean, not like on the crew team on a river. I have literally never rowed a boat. I've committed to this thing. I've sold the idea at scale. I have other teammates with me, but I'm not a rower. The fixed mindset would say, you're the biggest idiot ever. You're going to kill yourself because, of course, you don't know how to row. And in 3 months, you're going to go try to row in an ocean. Instead, for me, which is a foundational part of my personality, is like the growth mindset in that moment goes, yep, I am not a rower right now, but I've got 3 months to learn as much as possible. Now, don't get me wrong. I immersed myself in everything I could do about rowing over those next 3 months. I also had confidence that the rowing was a big component of it. But so was the mindset of being on an expedition and being cold and taking care of myself for a long period of time and staying positive. I believed in those other things, those skills that I had built up in that moment. But anyways, what we're talking about, and you can apply this to really any medium of your life, who's ever is watching it, it doesn't matter what you are right now, as long as you believe that you can grow and learn and evolve into anything you want to be. And when you realize that, when you really embody that mindset shift, the possibilities are limitless, particularly in a world where you have the internet. You know what? You might not have $1 million in your bank account. You might not have copious amounts of time because you have to work this job and pay your bills or whatever that is. But we have close to as much free access to information that we have ever had in human history. So in some level, there's no excuse not to be able to learn, to teach yourself something, to inquire. And you'll be surprised, even for me, all of a sudden I reached out to some people. There was a rowing coach, willing to help me train for rowing. There was other resources that I pulled in, whatnot. And that growth mindset to me is really the essence of the bedrock, or the foundational bedrock of achievement.
It's really inspiring to see people with those kind of mindsets, and it can lead into so many different things, and we can see people do different things with it, but it's unbelievable. One thing that you just touched on there was the idea of setting a higher goal and pushing further. Is there a thing to watch out for of like an obsession of trying to raise the stakes each time? I mean, especially for you, like, are you worried that maybe you will take it too far, or you need to take it too far?
Yes, it's certainly something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and certainly in what I've done. Oh, Colin O'Brady, this world record holding explorer. Last year he did this. What's his next big thing going to be? And what's the next bigger thing after that going to be? Whatever. And ultimately, it's probably true of everyone, but it's particularly true of what I do when the stakes are literally life and death. If you keep, ratcheting that up, at some point, you might end up dead, right? And that's certainly not my goal. What I think is more important to stay in touch with versus the external, what's the bigger, badder, thing, is when I look at these, and I'm not going to lie, in my earlier life, very competitive athlete, I think I was looking for some level of both internal and external validation, looking for the world to say, yeah, man, like, you're a great athlete. Like, wow, you walked across Antarctica or whatever. I will say at this point in my career, and this point in my maturation or wisdom, I feel like I've done that. I feel like I don't have to prove myself to the world in that same way. My ego doesn't need that. But the growth mindset, the curious person that lives inside of me still wants to explore, right? Because to me, in my book, The Impossible First, spoiler alert, I make it across Antarctica. Most people know that when they pick up the book, right? And you could end a book like that with a browbeating or chest pounding, I crossed Antarctica, I'm the first, like, I'm amazing, awesome. The last chapter of my book is actually titled Infinite Love. And it's because, yes, I'm telling you a rich story that's about adventure and all the different crazy things that happen in the storms and the battling, whatever. But at the end of the day, that exploration was just a medium for me to explore myself, to learn more about myself, to ground myself in love and compassion and empathy and family and all these types of things. And so it's kind of a tangent to your question, but the question is it always about ratcheting up the next thing? I think it is always for sure about growth. We are constantly growing. We are constantly evolving. We are constantly changing who we are, and hopefully for the better. Just because you reach the one mountaintop doesn't mean there's not another mountaintop. That said, there's certain things that we look for, like more money, for example, is a common one. Oh, I sold my company. Now I better start a company that's even bigger next time. And I sold it. And look, I've had some, financial success over the course of my career that I'm very proud of. But the end goal isn't always more and better and harder. And can I walk across an even longer or further continent or whatever? It's, can I consistently grow and evolve to become a better and better version of myself? And so I like to say we can explore the outer space, the external, so to speak, but I think there's infinite ways to explore and grow internally. And whatever your creative expression is, I like to climb mountains and freeze my ass off walking across continents and things like that. And most people watching that, like, that's not your thing. Totally get it. But there's masterpieces to be continually painted on the canvas of your own choosing, whether that's relationships, entrepreneurship, love, music, art, creativity, like a podcast, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what that medium is. And so to me, that lifelong learner, that continual curiosity is what fuels it, not as the external one-upmanship, because I think that that's a fallacy of a game to be playing over and over again. But I do think we can constantly become better versions of ourselves through curiosity and growth. And I think that's ultimately very valuable.
It really resonates because in movies and films, it's like this is how the stories are created. We have the surface level goal of getting the girl or climbing the mountain, but there's this underlying story that is about the growth of the character. And I do genuinely feel that as well. A lot of the time, for me, when we're trying to do something, if we achieve something, it's more about the growth and the journey along the way that is the thing you enjoy most as well. I think this is one thing I did want to ask you. You kind of answered it a little bit there, but is how do you stay away from getting stuck in the result, in the standing on top of the mountain, the newspaper article of you? How do you not get stuck there and stay in that sort of, like you say, with the ego?
So obviously we've talked a lot about goals and or achievement, etc. And we've talked about how big goals can sort of anchor an incremental process. Now, again, it's cliche, but somewhat cliche for a reason, is when you really get in touch with, it's the journey and it's not the destination. It's a really powerful thing to go through in life. Now, I'll give you an example from my own life recently. A few months ago, my wife several years ago had set up to say, hey, I want to climb Mount Everest. She's the person sitting and watching the runners outside going, I'm not a this. She doesn't identify, she's an active person, but she doesn't identify herself as a mountaineer or a climber or adventurer. She's been wildly supportive of me, but that's not her core identity. But she says to me one day, hey, I want to climb Mount Everest. I said, great. I'd love to support you in that, help you, I can teach you some things and it'd be amazing to be up there together, et cetera. So COVID, we're supposed to go in 2020. COVID happens, cancels the expedition. We put some money down as a deposit, but it's like, obviously it's not going to happen. So then the following year comes around and she kind of just gives up on the goal. Like she just stops training. She's just like not that into it. I'm kind of bummed for her. And she's just like, honestly, like that's not important to me anymore. So this spring rolls around and I say to myself, well, we put the money down. So like, I think I'm still going to go back there. And there was a world record that I was attempting to do, a world first actually, which was a non-supplemental oxygen climb of Everest and then directly continuing the ridgeline to Lhotse, which is the fourth tallest mountain in the world. Again, something that would be attention grabbing, that's world record, that'd be on newspaper clipping, the destination. All of a sudden, now I've set this record, this another world record. Colin O'Brady's got his next world record goal. And Jenna says, maybe I'll come over to base camp, with you. do the 10-day hike into Everest base camp. Oh, that'd be so cool. So she comes over to base camp. We're sitting at base camp and I'm getting ready to climb up to the mountain, the upper camps of the mountain, to get my body acclimatized to the thin air. And she goes, now that we're here, like maybe I could have just at least climbed to camp 1 or like camp 2 with you or something like that. And I'm like, wow, that'd be super cool. Like her permit allows her to go up to camp 2. So we climb for 2 days and she does amazingly well. Then I go higher on the mountain. I go higher up the mountain to acclimatize, leave her at camp 2 for a couple nights, 21,000 feet. Usually that's a really rough place to be. Your head's pounding, you feel sick, whatever. And I come back down and I'm like, how you doing? She's like, yeah, I'm actually feeling pretty good. Like, and she just says to me off the cuff, do you think I could climb Mount Everest like one day? And I was like, one day? Like, you're climbing amazing. Like, why not this month? Why not right now? We could try to pull some strings and get a last minute permit for you or whatever. And she's kind of like, oh no, I didn't train enough. I didn't this. But we go back down to base camp and sure enough, she kind of warms to the idea. And so long story short, we get her the permit, all this kind of stuff. And we go up the mountain and we end up, a lot of intense things happen. We get brushed by the edge of an avalanche that collapses our tent. We get in some really challenging circumstances and that big story for another day, but she perseveres through that. And ultimately on June 1st, just this, a few months ago, on June 1st, we summit Mount Everest together. And I give up on my non-supplemental oxygen goal. I use supplemental oxygen so I can most safely support her in this. And I bring this up because, to your question about the journey, your question about how to not get caught up in the ego. And like I said, there's been times in my life where I needed the individual goal or the accolade or something like that. But now I look back on all of my expeditions from this vantage point. I'm 36 years old and look back on it, the 10 world records, the ocean row and the Antarctica solo crossing, all things that I'm deeply proud of, like super proud of that, my Antarctica crossing, 2 billion media impressions. I was on every talk show talking about it and sharing about it a few years ago, whatever, wrote a book about it, New York Times bestseller. Look, I'm proud of all of those things. But having this shared moment with my wife on the top of the world, which is not a world record, but is deeply meaningful to me because the experience, the journey to see her transformation from someone who gave up on her goal to then doubled back down on her goal, just the hug and the kiss that we shared on that summit, like this is something that we're going to remember and cherish for an entire lifetime. And it was the journey, it was the shared experience, it was being there with my family, my person, that is the most rewarding of any of my expeditions. And so again, I keep, obviously my life experiences draw from these expeditions, but it's true in any medium, which is if you're building a company right now, you know what? Look, I've sold a company for millions of dollars. It's awesome. It's a great feeling or whatever. But what I'm most proud of is that I'm still I was just with them last weekend, deeply close friends with my co-founders. Like they're my boys. And we can be like, yo, remember when this was just an idea and then we built it and then it built into something else and then we created it and this and that, we had the eventual success. The day the money got transferred to our account when the other company bought our company, yeah, like that was a moment to celebrate. That was the summit or the mountaintop. But if all the 5 years, every single day with my buddies building the thing sucked, then the summit is also going to suck. And so it's about finding joy in the challenges. It's finding joy in the creative expression and it's sharing it with those that you love. In this case with Jenna and climbing Mount Everest, like that was a beautiful thing. There weren't headlines about it. There was, sure, we got pats on the back from our family and friends who knew we did this. My social media account, people were, lots of likes or whatever. But like this was for us. And that is where when you can tap into that, you can realize that like the true joys. And I've come to this realization by actually talking to people that are 4 decades older than me, people that are in the final chapter of their life. And almost across the board, people 80 years old look back. They don't say, I wish I had stood on more mountaintops, or I wish I had had more money, or I wish I had gone to work more, or this. It all comes back to, I wish I had had more quality shared time and enjoyed the journey with the people that I love more than anything. And so I try to stay in touch with that.
Something that really resonates with me at the moment as well. That's a lot of the meditation and mindfulness for me is realizing that and not trying to get obsessed into the work. So I think this is good to come to this then is you've mentioned your wife quite a lot and I think it's fantastic and your mum as well and having that support system, is that how important is it to find people around you who support you and your goals?
I think it's perhaps the most important thing because, I'm a believer that we are the sum of the 5 or 10 people, we spend the most time with. Maybe this is too basic of an example, but it resonates with people. It's like, you hang around with 4 millionaires, you're likely to be the fifth. You hang around with 4 broke people, you're likely to be the fifth, And look, it's not about money. That's an oversimplified example, but it's like surround yourself with the type of people that you yourself want to be. And I think we can all resonate a little bit with this, which is, I know this is true in my life. You've got a buddy that you hung out with since you were 10 years old because you grew up in school together or they're in your same neighborhood with you. And you go meet up with them at the bar or the pub, now and again and have a beer. And you start saying, oh, hey, I'm thinking about this or I'm thinking about that or I'm working on this or whatever. And they're just in a negative spot in their life. And they're like, dude, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Like they're kind of pulling you down a little bit. Now, I don't say just drop people from your life and just be like a total asshole. But I am saying this, like you get to choose, just like you get to choose the thought that go into your brain. You get to choose and cultivate your community. And if you look around and realize that most of the people you spend a lot of your time with, whether that's your coworkers, whether that's your friendships, whether that's your romantic relationships, whatever that is, are actually people that are like dragging you down a vast majority of the time, it's time to do an audit on those relationships. Because if you want to be the best version of yourself, you need to surround yourself with people who also want that for you. And by the way, it goes the other way, that you want to support in their goals. And once you have that, you don't have to have the same goals as each other, but the symbiotic relationship of like when you that feeling when your friend's a little annoyed or jealous or FOMO, or the person that's like, hey man, you had some success today. I am actually just genuinely happy for you. Like look for people like that. And I'll take it one step further because I think this is actually very important to this point. Again, we are the net product of the 5 or 10 people we spend the most time around. It's not a magic number, but it's effectively your core community. Now, not just because of COVID, but just because the world that we live in a digital world, right? Most of us, myself included, are on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on Facebook, we're on social media in some capacity, right? And I like to say, think about 20% or 30% of your community, of those 5 or 10 people, is your digital community. Like literally your digital community. You might follow people online that are famous people or that you've never met before, but you are choosing to input their messaging into your body. And so I know I have this feeling, I think most people can relate to this. There's probably 5, 10, maybe 50, 100 people that you follow that actually don't make you feel very good, that actually trigger you. Oh my God, that girl has such a nice body and I'm never going to be that fit. Or like, this dude's flying around in his private jet. My company sucks because he's richer than me. If those people are aspirational and they inspire you, keep following them. But if you have people in your digital world, whether they're celebrities or your friend down the street, that consistently trigger you in a negative way, the easiest thing you can do, literally do it right now. Take out your phone, unfollow, 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 unfollow. And it's not because you're saying that person's a horrible person. It's just saying their message, the energy they're giving to me is actually dragging me down. So not only do an audit on your friends that you actually see in real life, but perhaps even more importantly, do an audit and fill that feed. If you're going to be on social media, fill that feed with things that are uplifting you, that are lighting you up, that are inspiring you, that are encouraging you. That looks different for every single person. But when you start to cultivate that community, it's really you're cultivating the brainwaves inside of your own mind to be oriented in the direction and the uplifting direction that you want. There's this example of crabs in a bucket. If you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket and one tries to climb out and gets to the very top, all of a sudden it's the nature of crabs. They grab on and they pull you back down in the bucket. They don't want to let you escape. And so if your friendships are looking like, hey, I'm doing these amazing things, or I'm aspiring to do these things, I'm aspiring to get out of the bucket and explore the world. But the people in your community or your digital community are the crabs pulling you back down in the bucket. It's time to rethink that community of friends.
I love it. A question that I ask everybody is, what motivates you?
I've used the word a few times, but I think curiosity is really at the top of the list for me. I guess because it's been the most publicly aware thing I've done. It's, exploration or crossing Antarctica solo. But I've done a lot of different things in my life, from business to Hollywood to, the family stuff to relationships to, all sorts of different mediums. And each one of those, the through line really is curiosity. I'm curious about life. I'm curious about this human experience that we're all having. And I'm curious to have the richest life experience, which is full of it all. So what motivates me and keeps me going is to continually be curious in all the different things that I do to kind of squeeze all the juice out of life, so to speak.
And the other one that I usually ask people, and it sounds like you have an interesting one, is a daily routine.
I think that I'm certainly not the first person to say this, but I think we all have probably the most control of our mornings and sometimes our nighttime routines, and in the middle of the days can get away from you in a number of different ways. But mine's not, it's not any earth shattering thing. But it's, I wake up, relatively early, well enough before I need to kind of, respond to an email or something like that. And I have those couple of hours in the morning that are, they're kind of just for me or just with me and my wife. But we usually, in that period of time, it's nourish my body in terms of, putting some healthy food into my body. I'm not a caffeine person, but some sort of, kind of nourishing breakfast or a smoothie or something like that. It's the moment to have that mindfulness or meditation, that 10 or 20 minutes of sitting, in meditation. And for me, most mornings, what it also looks like is we live in this beautiful kind of wilderness in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And I wake my dog up and we go there's this mile long sort of dirt loop right outside our house. And we do that, all three of those things kind of like set me up, I think, for be my best, show up my best self, in that day. Obviously exercise is in there, as, I think it probably likely should be for everyone, but certainly someone, myself, a professional athlete, keeping my body sharp. But, in all of that, the one thing I don't do is check my phone first thing. It is wake up and have my phone on the bedside table, and before I'm even out of bed or showered or whatever, I'm scrolling and, oh shit, I got to respond to this or that or whatever that is. And so it's taking that, and then in the evening, I'm an avid reader. I love reading. I'm always reading throughout sometimes in the days or whatever, but without fail, in the evenings, as I'm going to bed to wind myself down, I read, 30 minutes to an hour, every single night. And I pretty much never do that on a screen. I never do that on like an iPad or something like that. It's either a book itself or my Kindle, but that's like the paper way. It looks like, not the bright screen one, that kind of messes with that, just to kind of wind myself down. I'm not trying to vilify email or screens, or technology is beautiful. We're talking to each other from other sides of the world right now is a beautiful thing. But it also, I put parameters on that throughout my day to kind of start my day and end my day, to just kind of be able to, be the most healthy and regenerated. I think lastly, I would say is, I obviously work hard. I have achieved a lot of things in my life, whatever, but sometimes people think, more is better, more is better. And one of the things I think is most important is sleep, honestly, is like actually creating the parameters on life to, when you lift weights, you don't get stronger lifting weights. You get stronger when you go to bed and your muscles rebuild themselves, right? And it's the same thing with body, mind, et cetera. And so prioritizing those beginning and ending of days and actually having that, so the next day you're as full and regenerated as possible is important for me anyways.
No, I'm the same as well. I love it. So where's the best place that people can find more? For me, tonight, I'm going to be watching the documentary. Like I'm going to be on Tonight Geo tonight and definitely give that a watch. So I'm excited for that. But where can people find the books, social media?
My book is called The Impossible First, From Fire to Ice, Crossing Antarctica Alone. But if you look up Impossible First, really anywhere books are sold, whether that's Amazon, your local bookstore, it's been translated into many languages all over Europe, etc. But in the UK, there's, obviously an English version there. So check that out. You should be able to find it anywhere, but if you can't, you can always go to my website. That's just my name, colinobrady.com. I do a lot of public speaking for groups and organizations and corporation. So all the stuff about my speaking is also on my website, colinobrady.com, and lots of pictures and things from my other expeditions. And then social media, I'm mostly active on Instagram. It's my most active platform. It's just my name, at Colin O'Brady. Come on over, give me a follow if I'm the person that's going to uplift you and be a part of your digital community. If I'm bringing you down, unfollow me. I don't think I'm going to. It's a lot of positive content. It's beautiful, videos and things from my expeditions and stuff. But you can check that out. And then the documentary that you mentioned, it's on Discovery Plus. That's Discovery Channel's streaming platform, Discovery Plus, and it's called The Impossible Row. So it's a feature-length documentary about me and my equally crazy friends going out and trying to row a tiny little rowboat all the way to Antarctica. So it's a good watch. I think you'll enjoy it for sure. And Jenna, my wife, is actually a big part of that film as well. As she's in an advisory role, but she's on camera a bunch and watching us and unfold. So you get a really good sense of her incredible support and love throughout that. So check out the book. Come to my website. Check me out at Colin O'Brady on Instagram. And this has been wonderful. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me, my friend.
Absolute pleasure, Colin. Everything will be linked down below. If anyone needs anything, please, all the resources will be linked down below. Thank you so much for your time.